Well, good afternoon, everybody. We'll get started now. Welcome to the Solar for Strata online information session. It's great to see such a strong response to this new council program. My name is Sonia Williams and I'm Council's Renewable Energy Innovation Officer. So firstly, for today's event, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we broadcast, the Gadigal and Wangal peoples of the Eora Nation, and pay our respects to elders past, present and future, as well as all elders on the lands in which this broadcast is being watched. This is and will always be Aboriginal land. So today's session is brought to you by Council's Green Living Centre, and the Green Living Centre supports and empowers the Inner West community to live more sustainably and adopting a low carbon lifestyle. It does this by focusing on energy use, how we move around and the ways and what we consume, including types of electricity, waste, water, food systems, fashion, share economy and building materials. So why are we here talking about solar for strata? Well, we've had a look at the breakdown of housing types in the Inner West, and 44% of all homes in our local government area are apartments, and there are trends that this will continue to rise. So on the whole, strata buildings in Australia consume 7% of the national electricity grid, which equates to an equivalent spend of $1.7 billion on electricity each year. So it's a growing market segment. And traditionally, apartments have had a much lower uptake of solar at just under 1%, 0.6%, compared with 22% in residential homes. What have been the challenges or the barriers in this sector? It's been difficult for the owners within strata schemes to identify the best model for solar for their buildings. And that is according to a number of factors, specifically taking into account the physical characteristics of the building and also the desires of the owner in the strata community. So this Solar for Strata program really aims to reduce the information and capacity barriers for both strata committees, residents and strata managers. Many strata committees are volunteer run, and so we want to be able to equip these groups to be able to better engage with the market. So a few housekeeping matters before we hand over to our guest presenter, Brent Clark. Just a note that we are recording this session and we will be inviting you to submit comments and questions using the Zoom Q&A tool. If you look at the bottom of your Zoom menu bar, you'll see Q&A. We'll have about 20 minutes for questions at the end of the presentation. This is set up as a webinar, so you will not be using your microphones or cameras in this meeting, and we request that all questions are put through the Q&A tool. We will be using the chat tool to share any links that come up in reference during the session. We'll also be running a number of polls, and that is to enable us to get some feedback on key topics, and we ask for your participation for these polls. For the questions and answers, we'll try to get through every comment and question where possible. A note about privacy: we are recording this meeting and it will be available in a few days' time, both on the Solar for Strata webpage, and it will be distributed to webinar registrants. You have the option to ask a question anonymously if you wish. If you do not select anonymous, then your name will be mentioned when we read out the question. So that will be included in the broadcast. So that's pretty much the end of the housekeeping, and it's now my great pleasure to introduce to you Brent Clark. Brent is the CEO and founder of energy consultancy Wattblock. Wattblock has assisted apartment buildings and housing over 60,000 residents with solar feasibilities, energy efficiency and electric vehicle charging reports. Wattblock has worked on projects for Advanced Queensland, the New South Wales Department of Planning, Industry Environment, as well as councils North Sydney, Lane Cove, Mossman and Woollahra and the City of Ryde. Brent specialises in breaking down the barriers to solar for strata and apartment buildings. So we welcome Brent.
Thanks, Sonia. Great to be here, and it's great to see so many people attending today for Go Solar for Strata, brought to you by Inner West team. In particular, thanks to Sonia and Kate and the Green Living Centre. On the front page here, we can see Revolution Apartments at 359 Illawarra Road, and we'll come back to this building a little bit later, as it's got one of the largest solar systems on an apartment block in the Inner West area. So the contents of what we're going to cover today, we'll look at why we might want to put solar on apartment buildings, cover some of the barriers for owners corporations, look at some different solar models and some different payment models, cover federal rebates, other considerations, and look at some great case studies that will hopefully inspire your Strata committee to move forward or start that journey towards solar.
Great. Brent, before we start, I might ask my colleague to launch the first poll. So we've had registrations from a broad sector of groups representing both owner-occupiers, non-resident landlords, strata managers, strata committee representatives. So we're just keen to understand who is participating in today's webinar. So if you're able to launch the poll, Emma, and then if we could ask people to click which one applies to them. More than one response is available for multiple responses. So whilst that's happening, Brent, you could potentially keep going.
Yep. So on the front, on the page at the moment, we've got a picture of what we consider to be a sustainable apartment building. And sustainability can cover energy, water and waste measures, as well as preparing for a future of solar, batteries and electric vehicle charging. So over time, we hope that all 340,000 of Australia's strata buildings begin to represent the diagram that we've got on the screen here. So why might we put solar on apartment buildings? First of all, it's a clean source of electricity. It can lower bills for common areas and potentially individual apartments. When it's combined with batteries, it can provide increased energy security. It's reducing our fossil fuel reliance, reducing carbon emissions from our buildings. And during our hot summer periods in Australia, it's reducing network demand. And if you think about it, electricity that's generated locally on your roof doesn't have the distribution losses which are associated when you're transmitting power from the Hunter Valley down to Sydney. But some of the barriers that we've found for owners corporations include split incentives. In particular, apartment blocks have a number of owner investors and a number of owner occupiers. And the incentives are slightly different for both of these people. You also have other stakeholders being tenants, the strata manager, potentially a facilities manager. And this leads into the issue of communication, which we need to improve in our strata building. And it's encouraging to see people starting to use WhatsApps groups and other instant messengers to improve that communication. But apathy has been a challenge in our strata environment, and it's sometimes been referred to as the fourth tier of government. So a presentation such as today's, sponsored by Inner West Council, is trying to improve the information that's available to our owners corporations. Other barriers can be access to finance and some tricky things such as embedded networks, which we'll cover a little bit later. So the opportunity, we've got 2.2 million apartments in Australia, representing 15% of households. Now, 62% of our apartment buildings are in buildings under 4 stories high. And in fact, 70% of our apartments are in apartment blocks which are under 5 stories high. And these are good contenders for putting rooftop solar systems. A third of new dwellings that are being constructed are apartment buildings. And as part of Inner West Go Solar, there are over 200 good solar locations on Strata buildings which have been identified and mapped on the Inner West Council website. On our screen here, we can see a 20 kilowatt solar system on an apartment block at 80A Victoria Road in Marrickville. Now, how can a solar system work in an apartment block? There's a new technology that's been developed here in Australia by a company called Illume, based in Melbourne, and they manufacture in Melbourne a solar sharing gateway. And this has now been approved for installation in the Ausgrid area, Ausgrid being the grid provider for the Inner West Council area. And the first installations of solar sharing gateways for apartment buildings using this new technology from Illume have occurred in 2020. This is something that wasn't available in previous years. We'll come back and we'll talk more about this a little bit later. But first, we'll just cover on a couple of units of measurement. So first of all, a kilowatt is a measure of instantaneous power at a point of time. A kilowatt is also used to describe the size of a solar system, for example, a 25 kilowatt solar system. Solar systems create direct current, which is then transformed to alternating current so it can be used in the building. It's transformed using a piece of equipment called an inverter. Now, the kilowatt hour is a measure of energy. So this is what you get billed on your electricity bill from your retailer. A kilowatt hour is also the unit of measurement for a battery. For example, you might buy a 14 kilowatt hour Tesla Powerwall. So a couple of rules of thumb. First of all, a 25 kilowatt solar system might produce 100 kilowatt hours of total energy over the course of the daylight period of the day. So you can think in your mind, roughly 4 times the amount of energy in kilowatt hours per day is created as the size of the solar system in kilowatts. Another question we frequently get asked is, what's the relationship between solar system size in kilowatts and the number of solar panels or square meters that it would take? So each solar panel is roughly 2 meters by 1 meter, but panels of the same size may produce more or less power depending on their performance. So a 330 watt panel might create more power than a 250 watt panel. Well, it definitely would. So the number of panels to make up 1 kilowatt of a solar system might be 4 250 watt panels or 3 330 watt panels. Now, there are even higher performance panels coming onto the market, which will be in the range of 500 watts to 600 watt panels, but you pay a premium for these higher performance panels the same way you pay a premium for the fastest computer processor in your computer. So just to recap, AC-DC is a band. DC-AC is what your solar system is doing. Another question we commonly get asked is about feed-in. So when more power is generated from your local solar system than can be consumed by the load of the building, the excess power generated is fed back into the grid. And you may be paid between 6 and 21 cents as part of a feed-in tariff from your energy retailer. An important point is that feed-in is not a government rebate. Feed-in is part of your tariff that you have with your existing energy retailer, and you may have to change your tariff if your current tariff doesn't have a feed-in rate attached to it after you get solar panels. So now in this next section, we're going to look at 4 different models for putting solar on an apartment building. On the screen here, you can see a 1 kilowatt individual solar system at 37 Darling Street in Balmain East. So an individual solar system for individual units is usually best for a townhouse complex or a low-rise apartment block, maybe 2 to 3 stories with a small number of units. You can see here there are 4 different units in this apartment block, and all 4 of them have a separate solar system. And that means they have a separate inverter for each of those solar systems. And so the overall cost of putting in 4 solar systems with 4 different inverters is actually quite high. There's not really a synergy between installation of these solar systems, but it is useful in a situation where you might have 6 townhouses and only 3 or 4 people are interested in putting solar panels in for their own individual townhouse, and a couple of people aren't interested. So as we said, this model mainly for the townhouse sector. We'll move to the second model, which is a solar system for the common property meter. So in our strata buildings, we typically have a house lights or common area electricity meter, and a solar system, as you can see in this diagram, that's on the common area roof is only connected to the common loads that might be running the lift, the lighting, maybe a pool, or some air conditioning in the building. Your common area meter may have to be upgraded to be a smart meter so that it can feed electricity into the grid. That's something that can't be done with the older analog or disc electricity meters. Here's Revolution Apartments in Marrickville that we saw on the front page of the presentation. This is the largest solar system on a residential apartment complex in the inner west area. It was installed by the developer at the time the building was constructed, but to give you an idea, it's an 80 kilowatt solar system. The cost of a system like this might be in the order of $70,000, and it might be providing a payback of about 5.5 years being attached to the common area meter. So the third model is using solar, a single solar system for the units and the common areas via a solar sharing gateway. And this can use the technology that we mentioned earlier from the Melbourne company called Illume, a solar sharing gateway. And the benefit of this is that you're not buying multiple inverters. The inverter component that does the transformation from DC to AC is the equipment part of a solar system, which is most likely to fail earlier on. The lifespan of an inverter might only be 6 to 12 years, whereas the panels can now be expected to last for 25 years. So you can see that there is a synergy from using a solar sharing gateway, having a single solar system and a single inverter, and then relying on this solar sharing gateway to do all the accounting and equitably distribute solar such that over the period of a month, each of the people that are connected to the solar sharing gateway get exactly the same amount of solar power. Now, the other benefit of this model is that not every apartment has to join in. In an apartment complex of 10 units, you could just have 6 or 7 apartments that want to use a solar sharing gateway, and just those 6 or 7 apartments pay their share of the solar system, the common solar system, after getting permission from the owners corporation to put a shared solar system on the roof of the apartment building and passing a special use bylaw in favour of those participant apartments. So this opens up a new category of solar implementations, which we would expect to proliferate throughout the inner west area over the next 10 years. And here we've got some photos from 13 to 19 Warren Street in Ryde, where the solar sharing system has been installed. Here it's sharing a single solar system that you can see on the roof amongst the 3 blocks and the 17 units. There's a limit currently on the number of apartments which can connect to each solar sharing gateway. So 15 units to each solar sharing gateway. So in this case, you can see the building has 2 Fronius inverters and 2 Sol Share gateways because they've got 17 apartments. But this is enabling a 25 kilowatt solar system to equally share its power across those 17 units. And then the 4th model is solar for the units and the common areas via an embedded network. And there are increasingly in the new developments in the inner west area, a number of these embedded networks being implemented. These embedded networks have a gate meter, which sits between the common area meter and all the unit meters, allowing bulk buying of electricity from the national electricity grid. There are examples of solar systems feeding into this gate meter, and then the private energy retailer that manages that embedded network is responsible just for billing each of the units and the common areas through their existing billing mechanism. So if you do have an embedded network already in your apartment building, then you don't need to go down that path of a solar sharing gateway. It would be redundant for your building. But there are a few challenges with this model, particularly when you're working with very large energy retailers, and sometimes the contracts don't give the owner's corporation the right to install their own solar system and connect it to the gate meter or even the common meter if those meters are owned by the embedded electrical network company. But in terms of a case study, Sydney University Housing in Newtown, known as Stuco, was the first multi-tenant apartment building in Australia, and they installed solar and batteries on top of an embedded electrical network back in 2015. The entire project cost about $130,000, and it should be on track to pay itself off by 2022. So in this particular case, you can see the battery bank down the bottom. They had 36 batteries from the company called Enphase, creating a 42 kilowatt hour battery system. Here we've got another example of...
Excuse me, Brent. We
Sure.
might just interject and have a pause. This seems to be a good time after we've gone through the solar models. So we've had, thank you everybody for responding to our attendee overview. We're going to launch the results of the first question. So you'll be able to see that we have a broad participation. That the largest categories are owner-occupiers and landlords and strata committee members. So a few renters and then non-resident apartment owners. So that's great. The people who are sort of have the decision-making capacity, which is our target audience. Now, having heard the different solar models, we're interested in what we would call the level of solar readiness for the attendees. So we're going to put up a next question, and that is really related to timeframes. When do you think your strata committee is ready to investigate solar? Would that be within the next year, the next 2 to 3 years, over 5 years, or you don't think that it would be an option? So can we ask people to put in their answers for the second poll? So I'll let you continue on. Thank you, Brent.
Okay, thanks, Sonia. So now we're going to have a look at 2 different payment models for a solar system on a strata building. And the first one is owning the solar system outright, sometimes called a capital expenditure or CapEx model for solar. Now, this model always gives the owner's corporation the maximum amount of control. And if, for example, you have a healthy capital works fund, formerly known as a sinking fund balance, this would typically be the optimal way for your owner's corporation to go about moving ahead with solar, is that you buy it out upfront. Whenever there's any form of solar finance, there will be an interest rate, even if it's hidden somewhere, which means over time you'll end up paying more for that solar system. So the model which gives the most control to the strata and the least cost, if you can afford it, is to buy it outright. And to give you an idea why you should consider this, many of our strata buildings have capital works funds which are earning something like 1%, 1.5% interest per annum on funds that are sitting there. And in some cases, we've seen strata buildings that if they were to invest a portion of those funds into a solar system, the portion of funds would actually be creating energy savings for the building that would be equivalent to getting a 7 or even an 8% return on that capital if it was converted back to an interest rate in terms of the savings that it's generating for the apartment building. So on this model, we've got 3 different parties. We've got your energy retailer, you've got the strata, and you've got the solar installer. And imagine that, usually you're buying your solar system from a different company from your existing energy retailer, although it is possible to go to your energy retailer and get a solar system from them. But the existing energy retailer might be providing you a feed-in tariff of, say, 6 cents up to as high as 21 cents per kilowatt hour that's paid for any excess solar that you feed into the grid. Under this model, your relationship with the solar installer is more transactional. They'll do the design and install. They'll process government rebates for you, usually deducting that from the net price of the solar system. And they'll be providing different warranties. For example, there could be a labor warranty, there could be a waterproofing warranty around anchor points into the roof. There could be a performance warranty on the panels, that the panels themselves will still output 80% of their generation after 25 years. So you've got a number of different warranties that would come from the solar installer. But this model gives the strata the ability to determine where the solar power is connected, the operating model, and that might actually change over the life of the 25 years of the solar system. You might be connecting it to the common area meter in the first instance, or later installing a solar sharing gateway or a battery and changing where the solar power is sent. The second model that's sometimes bandied about is called the Power Purchase Agreement, or a PPA. It's a form of solar finance. Under this model, the owner's corporation doesn't initially own the solar system. It could be a $0 paid upfront model. Now, once again, you'd still have your existing relationship with your energy retailer, but you would have to change your tariff with them so that you get a feed-in rate on any excess solar. Now, an important thing to check is if you're under a power purchase agreement, you're actually, for a period of time, which might be 10 years of the 25 years of the operating life of the solar system, paying to a third party a rate per kilowatt hour for solar which is generated off those panels. And you might be paying 19.5 cents per kilowatt hour, which you need to check is cheaper than your grid electricity rate. That might be 25 cents per kilowatt hour. But also during a period of excess generation, during summer when you're generating the most of your solar, You would also want to be checking that if you were paying 19.5 cents for each kilowatt hour of solar that's generated off that system, and you were feeding into the grid, you'd want to be getting higher than 19.5 cents on your feed-in tariff. So you'd really want to be getting that 20 or 21 cent feed-in tariff from your energy retailer, so that you're not losing money on the excess solar that's fed back into the grid. And then after the 10-year term of the power purchase agreement, the owners corporation would take full responsibility. That means the maintenance, perhaps replacing the inverter, replacing a faulty panel, cleaning the system would fall under the responsibility of the owners corporation for the remaining 15 years of the life of the solar system. But for those remaining 15 years, you wouldn't be paying per kilowatt hour generated off the panel. The owners corporation would be getting all the benefits of that solar at no cost. So now we'll just jump on to have a look at some of the federal government rebates. So for the vast majority of our apartment buildings, they'll be looking at a federal government rebate that's paid upfront at the time of purchase of the solar system, called Small Scale Technology Certificates, or STCs. This applies to solar systems under 100 kilowatt hours, which would be 95% of the strata buildings in a west area would be looking at a solar system that's under that size. And this is only available from solar installers who are accredited with the Clean Energy Council, and they'll typically quote it net in the price of the solar system that you're purchasing. One thing you can do is go to a website, and because the STCs change in value on a daily basis, you can actually check on a government website the current STC rate and see whether that's reflective of what the current market conditions is compared to the quote that you get from your solar installer. There's another, I should just mention the small scale technology certificates get less attractive in each consecutive year going up to the year 2030. So that's a reason to get a solar system earlier rather than waiting for later, because this STC rebate is material and it's getting slightly smaller each year until 2030. Large-scale generation certificates would only be for multi-block sites, perhaps with embedded networks, that are looking at a system over 100 kilowatts. Basically, there's a dead zone in solar systems between 100 and 200 kilowatts where this rebate program is not that attractive. So to go for a solar system that's bigger than 100, you really need to find a massive site that can take 200 kilowatts to really start to get the benefit of the LGCs. A couple of other considerations. Just checking in, do we have another poll that we want to run, Sonia?
We'll do it once you've talked through the considerations, because that's part of the question.
Yeah, okay. So a couple of things we have to think about on our apartment blocks are waterproofing. Quite often, for a strata building, a waterproofing job is much more expensive than a solar system. So here we're looking at a before and after photo of a triple layer waterproofing project that was a $100,000 project. This building was contemplating doing that prior to a $30,000 solar photovoltaic system. Another question we get asked often is, do we have to penetrate the slab on our apartment building roof? It is possible to use ballast. You can see the concrete blocks here to weight down the racking system for the solar system. And that doesn't have any penetrations or anchoring into the slab. But keep in mind, a ballast weighted solar system is fairly rare, and it will cost about 1/3 more for the same size solar system. And it involves structural engineering, wind speed sign-offs, and the higher your building goes, the more ballast that you need. So you're putting a lot of extra load and weight on the building. Now, this is a really important one. The state of your switchboard and meter board in your Strata. Here we can see that we've got analog disc meters next to more modern digital smart meters on this particular board. But this is not an uncommon sight in our residential Strata buildings. And this is an example of a board that's not compliant to AS3000. So this would actually be a fire hazard. And there's a case just for upgrading these meter boards and switchboards in our older Strata buildings from the 60s and the 70s, just in terms of getting them up to that AS3000 standard, getting rid of ceramic fuses, replacing them with RCDs or residual current devices, and also sometimes creating enough space for the smart meters. So you know, some of the smart meters are larger than the analog disc meters, so you might need a slightly larger meter board to hold the smart meters in the future. And there are extra benefits that go along with getting smart meters for the apartments. You know, it's a project that's not just for the solar. It helps with electric vehicle charging, split aircon, induction cooktops, getting mobile phone apps that allow you to buy wholesale electricity prices, and time of use tariffs, which might help people that have electric hot water heaters get more efficient pricing on their hot water. So it's a really important project, and we encourage everyone to start thinking and planning that into the Capital Works Fund. Getting panels to the roof can be a challenge in Strata. Not everyone can walk the panels up a fire escape and straight out onto the roof, so you may need some craning. And if you're on a busy street, you might have to get council approval to close a lane of the street to be able to crane the panels up. Another thing to consider is shading from other apartment buildings or trees. So if you've got a rooftop that's partially shaded, then you may not want to use a string inverter. You might want to go with a more expensive micro inverter or DC optimizer model. And this allows shading to go on some panels without taking out all the panels in a particular string and stopping them from generating. So it's a little bit more expensive, but allows you to move forward with the solar system in an area where you might have partial shading for part of the day. So we'll have a look at some case studies now.
Actually, Brent, before we do case studies, we might take a pause and we can report back the responses from our second poll, which really assessed solar readiness. So fantastic. The most popular option was we're ready to investigate solar within the next year, 54% of respondents, followed by within 2 to 3 years, 27%. So that's great to hear. The next question really is following up on the other considerations content of your presentation. We're keen to know from registrants what are the pre-solar activities that they feel they need to do before they're ready for solar. So we'll launch our third poll, and that really is looking at whether or not blocks need to look at electrical meter upgrading, as you mentioned, any re-roofing, waterproofing, or even looking at energy efficiency opportunities before as a precursor to putting in solar. So the idea would be to reduce your electrical consumption, which then assists in being able to correctly size the solar system. So you've got more opportunities. So we'll launch that third poll and invite you to take us through the case studies. Thank you, Brent.
Great. So here's an example where you're considering a large solar system, and we'll consider anything that's near 100 kilowatts to be a large solar system. Expect a relatively large lead time in terms of preparing for this as an owner's corporation. So I took the photo on the top of Key Grand on the left in 2015, and it wasn't until 2017 that this 99 kilowatt solar system was installed. And now we know why they installed a 99 kilowatt solar system. That was because that was the maximum size under the small technology certificate rebate scheme. So by putting in 99 kilowatts, they stayed under that 100 kilowatt limit and maxed out the federal government rebate. So that's for our larger strata schemes. That's one of the magic numbers. For our smaller strata schemes, one of the magic numbers is a 39 kilowatt solar system. That's because, after a certain size solar system, you have to install grid protection equipment, which is an extra cost, maybe an extra $6,000 on a solar system. To protect Ausgrid workers if they were working on that section of the grid during a power outage, that that grid protection equipment is between your solar system and the grid. So a couple of magic numbers, 39 kilowatt solar system and 99 kilowatt solar system. Here's a case study from Harbour One in Melbourne, and this is a strata building that's used flexible solar skin and installed it vertically on a plant room roof. To give you an idea, this solar skin, it's also on the Maritime Museum in Darling Harbour. It's about a third the weight of a traditional solar panel. It has about 80% of the performance of a traditional glass solar photovoltaic panel. And this is an example where they've actually gone vertically. You don't get as good generation when solar skin is installed vertically as when solar skin is installed horizontally. So this building actually does have a number of solar skins on the roof of the plant room as well. But that's an innovative new technology from eArch and Energous. Here in Melbourne, we've got an example of Onyx solar glass. So it's actually built into the glass balustrades on this particular building. They're see-through solar photovoltaic glass panels that you can see. This is hugely expensive. We would only recommend this for a developer that wants to do a signature development at this stage. If we jump over to Perth, we've got a case study at White Gum Valley. And this is an example where they've set up a energy trading system that apartment dwellers in the complex can actually trade excess solar power with other residents in the complex, rather than feeding that excess solar back into the grid. And that uses innovative technology from Power Ledger for blockchain, which is used to record the metering data and the energy trading between participants. There's not an example that I'm aware of in Sydney yet of this technology. You would probably have to have an embedded network installed first before you could move forward with energy trading. We also get asked about solar tiles. The Tesla solar tiles are not available in Australia yet, but there are 4 companies here that do have the solar tiles: Bristile, Newlock, Tractile, and Monia. The efficiency of the solar tiles is sometimes a little bit less than the efficiency of a traditional solar panel, and they're about 3 times the cost of the equivalent solar panels required for the same size system. But definitely a new technology coming. And in this final case study, we've got an example of solar-powered EV charging. So this is the Genesis building over at Meadowbank, 58 units. They've got a 30 kilowatt solar system feeding an embedded electrical network. And the Strata Committee voted to install an EV charger connected to the embedded network in the basement car park, which you can see on the right. So during the day, if an electric vehicle connects to that EV charging point, on a user pays basis, they can be getting solar power into their electric vehicle. So now we'll just go over a couple of the criteria for joining InnoWest's Go Solar for Strata program. So obviously, have a think about the age of your building, what type of roof you have. Like a ColourBond roof is actually very good for installing solar on. You can still install on tiles, you can install on concrete roofs, but you've got some of the issues like checking your waterproofing. The location, do you have any shading from nearby trees or other apartment buildings? Are you more of a lower rise building that's 5 stories or under? And think about the loads that you've got on your common areas. Do you have air conditioning for foyers, swimming pools, etc.? These are the considerations, for you to go through and think about registering for InnoWest Go Solar. Council's created this online map, and you can see over 200 priority candidate buildings where we've identified that you could get a 10 kilowatt or greater solar system installed on the Strata buildings in these locations. Smaller systems that could still be viable, that aren't on the map, it could be viable to put a 6.6 kilowatt solar system on some other Strata buildings that we haven't identified, but here are some top priority candidates. And there's a solar feasibility request form that you can find from the Go Solar website on InnoWest Council's page if you'd like to register your building. So happy now to hand back to Sonia for the poll results, and we'll move into questions.
Thanks, Brent. We will publish the results of our third poll, which was looking at pre-solar activities. So the most common response was electrical meter upgrade, and really, in effect, that can happen at the same time as a solar installation. So that's quite encouraging. And then that was 61% of respondents, and then about the same second and third, very close together, energy efficiency measures at 39%, and re-roofing or looking at retiling or re-waterproofing, but 24% are ready to roll now. So that's great. Before we launch into our Q&A, we'll launch our final poll, which is really next steps, having participated in this webinar, and we're keen to assess people still have information gaps. Are they confident? Are they unsure of what to do next? What are your feelings? So if we could launch that poll and people could ask that. And a reminder also that we're asking all participants to type your questions in the Q&A, which is down if you look at the bottom of your screen. So while we're waiting for people to fill in the final poll, we've already had some questions asked during your presentation, Brent, so I'll start with reading them out. Question from Stephen Parry. Does all of this relate to townhouse owners under stratas as well? Or only apartments? Would installation work out cheaper if townhouse owners under one strata went in together?
Yeah, look, this is a really good question because in a townhouse, which is a strata, people tend to think that the roof space directly above your townhouse is owned by you, but in fact, that is common property. And in previous case studies, we've even found where you've got tree shading on a townhouse complex, people that want to be first in with the solar system actually have as much right to install their solar system on the townhouse roof above someone else's townhouse as on their own roof. And so because the entire townhouse roof in a strata is common property, you need to seek approval through the strata. Also, individual townhouses might only need a 1.5 to 2.5 kilowatt solar system, which is not really attractive enough for a solar installer to come out and do as a single job. So basically, you need a group, a buying club of at least 3 townhouses or 2 townhouses and the common area meter if you've got some shared facilities, to be able to go out and get a solar installer, to be able to do the 3 different systems in one day, instead of doing a single house where they can do a 6.6 kilowatt solar system, which is sort of the now the smallest economic solar system to install. So yeah, definitely start talking to your neighbours and try and get at least 3 townhouse owners to club together.
Yeah, or even bring it up at a Strata committee meeting.
Yep.
Thank you. Our next question is from Royce. Would all apartments need to use the same power company?
No. So even in situations where you've got a solar sharing gateway, you still have the right to choose your own energy retailer. So these are separate contracts that you're entering into. So not everyone has to be using the same power company.
Great. Next question was, what rebates are available?
Okay, so for solar systems under 100 kilowatts in size, you've got the small scale technology certificates. And for greater than 100 kilowatts, you've got the large scale generation certificates. At the moment, for a Strata building, there's not another interest-free loan in New South Wales. If you're a standalone house, there are, under the Berejiklian government, there are some other incentives, but there are no other state incentives currently available for solar or batteries, although we could expect that batteries might come in the next 1 to 2 years in New South Wales.
Great. And then also for the successful buildings that are participating in the Go Solar for Strata program, Council will cover the cost of the feasibility study and the assistance for the Strata committee through the solar process. It's not typically a rebate, but it's an offer to buildings. Great. Next question is, how much waterproofing is necessary on a ColourBond roof system? From Julie.
Yeah, ColourBond roof systems are great. In fact, they're the best roof type to get a solar system installed on. And in most cases, you won't need any additional waterproofing. There is a clip lock racking system that can go around the ridges on the ColourBond roof. And so there's not so much a waterproofing job, it's just checking whether your ColourBond that's not rusted through because it's 20 or 30 years old. So it's a great roof type. And if anyone's replacing their roof on a Strata, have a good think about using ColourBond, to make that new roof solar friendly.
Great. Thanks, Brent. The next question from Michael is, does Council provide an assessment? Meaning the solar feasibility assessment.
Yeah, so for the successful registrants, through the registration form, Council has a limited number of buildings that will be getting a fully funded solar feasibility study under this program.
Yes, but it will be, we're contracting Watt Block to run the assessments. So the face-to-face contact will be with Brent and his team. Thank you. Next question from Catherine. Are you able to provide an example of a bylaw for common property only?
Yeah, so look, for Strata buildings, it's always best for you to approach your Strata lawyer for the bylaws which are right for your particular building. So neither Council nor Watt Block are providing specific legal advice around bylaws, because there are things that are kind of specific to your particular needs. However, we will give people that join the program or download the resource materials, some examples around ideas of what to think about to go into those bylaws, for common property solar systems. The most important thing we should bring out is there's currently a sustainability infrastructure amendment going through the New South Wales Parliament. At this point in time, it's having a little bit of a slow process due to the pets issue, but it will be lowering the requirement from a special resolution down to an ordinary resolution, moving from a 75% voting threshold down to a 50% voting threshold for anything that's environmental, solar, batteries, electric vehicle charging in a strata scheme. And so, that is imminent, and it should be making life a lot easier for our New South Wales strata schemes. Western Australia has already implemented this a year or two back, to make it easier for strata schemes to pass bylaws through getting the voting thresholds.
Great, thanks, Brent. We've got quite a few questions, so we might just pick up the pace going through the final ones, and I'll try and batch together similar questions. Does the feasibility check or assessment offer cost?
Check offer cost. We're not offering a tendering service for the strata schemes because typically what happens is any solar quote that you get today will expire before your strata committee can approve it. So we'll give you estimates around the different costs for the different models in order to allow your strata scheme to set a budget allocation. Once that budget allocation has been approved by your strata committee, is the best time to go and get your solar offers in. Okay.
Great, thanks, Brent. Next, Michael says that he has a building, that his building has a large north-facing roof, but doesn't appear on our priority list. Okay. Assume that the building is quite old.
Okay. Look, we were trying to find buildings that were more likely to have done the meter board and switchboard upgrade for the priority list, but we still encourage you to register, particularly if you've got a new meter board that has been upgraded.
Great. So the answer is register, and then we'll go through a level of culling. Thanks. The next question is, how would you treat a mix of a 5-level apartment block with 33 apartments and 3 townhouses at the rear of the property?
So once again, if it's on the same strata scheme, all the roof of the townhouses and the apartment block is common property, and a solar system on the townhouses could be much cheaper to install with less craning cost than on the roof of the apartment block. So we start from both angles and try to work out which is optimal for that particular apartment building, taking into the load the load on the common areas and the lower cost of installing on a lower roof.
Great, thanks. We have a question around roof aspect. If there is minimal north facing, mostly east and west facing, is that still an option?
It's still viable. In particular, west facing roofs are good for solar sharing gateways or individual apartment solar systems because you've still got generation, in summertime, quite late in the evening as people are getting home from work. So west is the next best after north, and you shouldn't rule that out if you've only got a small north roof aspect.
Okay, great. Another question is that they're preparing for a roof replacement, colour bond, in the next year. Do they need to account for the extra weight for the panels, like to reinforce the structure under the roof? If so, what needs to be considered for the structure?
So look, a good thing for you to consider here, most colour bond is strong enough to take the clip lock panel systems, but you can also consider those flexible solar skin that we showed the case study of, which is 1/3 the weight of a traditional solar panel of a traditional solar glass panel system. And so the economics might stack up that it's worth paying a little bit more for that flexible solar skin rather than going for extra roof reinforcement.
Great. Are there any rebates to encourage Strata blocks to update to smart meters in order to get solar fitted? From Claire.
Yeah, not in New South Wales. As we know, in Victoria, they mandated smart meters across the entire state, and it was done as a project. In New South Wales, it's an organic process, but the responsibility of the owners corporation is to update the meter board to get enough space. And then a lot of these smart meters, if you call up AGL and you've got a compliant meter board, they'll come and put a smart meter in even for a tenant or a renter at no cost.
Great. If Luke's building has 104 separate apartments and the electricity meters are on each level, not in a common electrical room, does this scale and layout preclude the use of the solar sharing gateway, and are embedded networks common or hard to install?
Okay, so question one, we've come across this before, and I will warn Luke that when the meters are on the individual levels, it made the cost of cabling into each of those individual apartment meters very high, to the point that the complex with 100 units didn't go ahead with the solar sharing gateway. The embedded networks are not common in terms of being retrofitted to an existing apartment block. They're usually only common in terms of a new building that's built by a developer. And in fact, it's very, very, very difficult to retrofit an embedded network, as you need 85% consent from all people in the building, not just owner occupiers, but also 85% across owner occupiers and tenants to retrofit an embedded network.
Great. Next question. We have 9 units. Some are owner occupiers, others are renters. Do all owners need to participate? Or if we can get a system approved at an AGM, can we just install a system for owners who want to participate?
Yes, so you can just install a system for those who want to participate. For a solar sharing gateway, to make it economic, you'd probably want to get the smallest solar sharing gateway in New South Wales is in Neutral Bay, 3 apartments and the common areas. But if you don't have a decent common area load, you'd probably be wanting to get at least 6 apartments to sign in on the solar sharing gateway.
Great. For an apartment building that is more than 40 years old, is it eligible for a feasibility study?
Yes.
Okay. Next, is clip lock suitable? And I'm guessing that is clip lock as in roofing type?
Right. Look, it can be done. So another thing is consider that flexible solar skin, again, on a clip lock roof.
Yep. Okay, great. So we've just got a few more questions. An observation that solar projects for apartments seems fairly involved. Does What Block provide on-site consultancy explanation to Strata apartments? So maybe if you want to talk through what the sort of solar Strata committee support is through the program.
Yeah, so through the Inner West Go Solar program, we do come and do a site visit. So it's not a remote aerial only assessment. But because it's not possible to get all the Strata committees at one point in time, we'll do a conference call or a Zoom call with the Strata committee to talk them through what we saw at the site visit.
Great. How do we convince owners who are just investors? We don't use much power in the common area.
So there's an example in Newcastle where an owner investor owned 2 apartments, and that owner investor actually pushed for the solar, and then basically it was creating, I'm just trying to think, $30 saving in electricity a month for the renter, and basically the owner investor upped the rent by $22.
Okay, great. One building asks why was one attendee asked why was there specific building left off the candidate list. I think you've run through the selection criteria, but still, if there is interest, we still encourage people to register, and maybe you have some more information about electrical meter upgrades or planned roofing replacements or any other projects that might be relevant. So that's great. And then Michael asks what was the trial, and my colleague has put down the link to the Go Solar for Strata program. So we've run one final comment. They've had a very good engagement with ARC Renewable Group in looking at our Strata building for solar. They're an installation company that I believe has a lot of experience in the Strata area, would you say, Brent?
Yep. ARC Renewable did the solar powered EV charging at the Genesis building. That was one of the case studies.
Great. Okay. So I think we will bring today's webinar to a close. I'd like to thank everybody for their participation and their fantastic questions. We'll send an email follow-up with a link to the recording of this session and some also an invitation for the registration form, and then some further information that Brent has provided us with specific resources for townhouses and white paper. So if people are interested in reading more about it, there are plenty of resources to share. So for the Go Solar for Strata trial, dates to consider, registrations close on the 30th of November. So we encourage you to share your learnings and even share the recording with the relevant decision makers within the Strata committee. And we do ask that when we're finalising the successful candidates, we do ask that the Strata committee sends a letter to say that they agree to participate, and we have the support for investigating solar. Did you have any final comments to add, Brent?
No, that's all. It's just been great to see the interest in Inner West around, moving towards renewable energy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. We hope to see many registration forms following today's session. Thank you very much. Bye.